Just think about your day so far. Did you grab a coffee? Maybe scroll through a social media app? Well, you've probably already made a few contracts today without even thinking about it. See, they're not just for high-powered lawyers. They are the invisible rules that pretty much structure our entire world. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and break down the whole life cycle of a contract, start to finish.
All right, let's kick this off with a question for you. What on earth could your morning coffee run possibly have in common with, say, a massive million-dollar corporate deal? The answer is pretty much everything that actually matters legally. They are both built on the exact same fundamental principles of contract law. So you can think of any contract negotiation kind of like a game. And the very first thing you have to do, the most critical step, is figure out which rulebook you're playing by. Because if you get this wrong, trust me, nothing else is going to matter.
Okay, so you've basically got two different worlds in contract law. On one side, there's something called the Uniform Commercial Code. Everyone just calls it the UCC. That's the rulebook for selling goods, which is just a fancy word for any physical thing you can move. Then, for everything else like services, real estate, or intellectual property, you've got the common law. So the first question a lawyer will always ask is super simple. Are we dealing with a thing or a service?
But come on, life is rarely that clean, right? A lot of deals are actually hybrids. Think about it. You buy a new computer, and the price includes a setup service. You get a new furnace, and installation comes with it. So which rulebook are you supposed to use when you've got both goods and services all wrapped up in one deal?
Well, courts have a clever way to figure this out. It's called the predominant purpose test. They basically just look at the whole deal and ask, what was the main point here? What were you really buying? They'll look at the wording of the contract, what the seller usually sells, and what you, the buyer, were really after. But honestly, the biggest clue is usually just the price tag. If the computer cost $900 and the setup service was only $50, the UCC, the rulebook for goods, is almost certainly going to govern the entire deal.
All right, so once we know which rulebook we're using, we can actually start to build the contract. And really, at its heart, every single contract is just a legal handshake. And that handshake is built on two key moments: an offer and an acceptance.
Now, an offer isn't just, a casual suggestion. Legally speaking, it's a very clear signal that says, I am ready to be locked into this deal. It has to be so direct and so clear that all the other person has to do to create a legally binding contract is say two simple words: I accept.
And this is a really important point. A lot of things look like offers, but legally they just aren't. That ad you see in a magazine, that's not an offer. It's just an invitation for you to come in and make an offer. Same goes for a price quote or some vague statement like, yeah, I might sell my car one of these days. That's all just talk, the warm-up to a negotiation, not the final, binding proposal.
Okay, so once a real offer is on the table, the other side can accept it. Now, under the old-school common law, that acceptance had to be absolutely perfect. It was called the mirror image rule, which meant your acceptance had to be a perfect reflection of the offer's terms. If you changed even one tiny thing, it wasn't an acceptance at all. It was a counteroffer, and poof, the original deal was dead. Of course, you can probably guess that this super strict mirror image rule is a total nightmare for modern business. I mean, think about it. Companies are firing purchase orders and invoices back and forth all day long, and the fine print on the back of those forms, it never, ever matches up perfectly. This classic problem even has a name: the battle of the forms.
And this is where the UCC comes in with a really brilliant practical solution. It basically says, hey, relax, you still have a contract. Any new terms are just seen as proposals. If both sides are merchants, those minor new terms just slide right into the deal unless someone objects. And what about the terms that flat out contradict each other, like different warranty details? The law just knocks out both of them and plugs in the UCC's own default rules instead. It's a really smart way to keep business moving forward. So now we've got an offer, we've got an acceptance. But there's one more absolutely vital ingredient that turns a simple promise into a contract a court will actually enforce. It's a concept called consideration, and you can think of it as the price of the promise. The key phrase here is bargained for exchange. Consideration is the this for that part of the deal. Each side has to give up something of legal value. It could be money, a product, a service, or even giving up your right to do something. If it's not a two-way street, you don't have a contract.
This means a promise to give someone a gift, not a contract, because you're not getting anything bargained for in return. Also, you can't make a new promise based on something that already happened. That's called past consideration, and it doesn't count. And of course, an illusory promise, like saying, "I'll pay you if I feel like it," is legally worthless because there's no real commitment there.
So what happens in those tricky situations where there isn't a technical contract, but someone makes a promise, you reasonably rely on it to your detriment, and now you're going to get hurt if they back out? Well, the law actually has a safety net for exactly this. It's a doctrine called promissory estoppel, and it can step in to enforce that promise just to prevent a really unfair result.
So, you've checked all the boxes. You've got your offer, your acceptance, your consideration. You have a solid contract, right? Well, not so fast. There's another layer of rules we have to look at, a whole set of potential escape routes that can make a seemingly perfect deal completely unenforceable.
The most famous of these is a law called the Statute of Frauds. All it says is that certain types of contracts are considered so important that they absolutely must be in writing to be enforced by a court. And to remember which ones they are, all you need is the simple acronym MYLEGS.
And here's what MYLGS stands for. M is for contracts related to marriage. Y is for deals that are impossible to finish within 1 year. L is for any interest in land. E is for an executor's promise to pay an estate's debt. G is for the sale of goods worth $500 or more. And S is for suretyship, which is just promising to pay someone else's debt. If your deal is in one of these buckets, the rule is crystal clear. Get it in writing.
And hey, even if a contract is in writing, it can still be thrown out if the deal wasn't made fairly. If someone lied to you to get you to sign, that's misrepresentation. If they threatened you, that's duress. And if a deal is just so ridiculously one-sided that it shocks the conscience, a court might call it unconscionable. These are all defenses that protect the idea of fair play in making a deal.
So what happens when it all falls apart? When one side breaks their promise, that's called a breach. And when that happens, the law has a whole toolbox full of remedies to try and fix the situation.
And here we go again. The rules are different depending on that first question we asked. For services under common law, you can only cancel the whole contract if it was a major failure, what lawyers call a material breach. But for goods under the UCC, the standard is way stricter. It's called the perfect tender rule, and it means if the goods aren't exactly what the contract called for, the buyer has the right to reject the whole shipment.
When a breach happens, the court's main goal is to make the injured person whole again. The #1 go-to remedy is what we call expectation damages. That's money designed to put you in the exact same financial position you would have been in if the promise hadn't been broken. Sometimes you might get reliance damages, which just pay you back for what you spent. And in very rare cases, with totally unique items like a piece of land or a one-of-a-kind painting, a court might actually order the other side to go through with the deal. That's called specific performance.
And this, right here, is probably the most important thing to understand about remedies. The legal system isn't trying to punish the person who broke the contract. It's just trying to economically fulfill the original promise for the person who got hurt. It's all about compensation, not about revenge.
So there you have it. From picking the right rulebook all the way to fixing a broken deal, that's the life cycle of a contract. It's this whole system of structured promises that holds our world together. The next time you click I agree or shake on a deal, what promise will you see a little differently now? Thanks for joining me.